RowdyWrestling.net.
There's a rowdy crowd today.
Hey now, everybody. Welcome to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. It's been 2 fucking years. Dropping the first F-bomb right there. But it has been 2 years. The first episode dropped August the 25th, 2015. It was a review of WWE SummerSlam. I had Pal Marino on with myself, Tony Stabile, as I haven't introduced myself yet. If this is your first episode of the podcast, do yourself a favor and download a bunch of other ones so you can see what it's really about. Because today is more about celebrating the fact that we've been doing this on our own. When I say on our own, I mean myself and Steve Rockamaniac for 2 years now. Steve joined a little bit after, as I had to do some coaxing, get him out of that dungeon he decided to put himself in. But 2 years of celebrating, doing things on your own, doing things the right way, and supporting indie pro wrestling while still loving the mainstream, the thing that brought us to the game, which is WWE, WCW, if that were still around, and even all the shit that Steve and I bring to the table when we talk about TNA or GFW, whatever they want to be called nowadays. This podcast in itself is here because we love pro wrestling, whether it be in front of 150 people in the bottom of a church in Tetroville, or it be at the Bell Center, or in Houston, Texas, as some people call it. We love pro wrestling, and to be honest, like I'm talking a lot right now, not letting Steve come in purposely. But before I get too emotional, because I'm really proud of what we've done in 2 years. It's a testament to the people who come back week in, week out and download the show to either support Steve and I, support the person who I'm interviewing that week, or just wanting to discover what else is there besides the WWE reviews. I want to thank each and every one of you for doing that. Now, I will get sentimental and probably cry later on, but let's bring on the man with no emotions, Steve Rockamaniac. How you doing, brother?
Hey now, everybody, as we celebrate the 2-year anniversary of the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast, and we're going to make myself feel old here, as it's been 14 freaking years. I've been in and around this crazy industry, we'll use the word, as really it was late 2003 when I first stepped in the ring, and today, of course, the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast is something that, as you alluded to, Tony, was a show that originally started for a couple of different reasons, and we'll definitely touch on those along the way. But amongst those reasons was Tony's desire to have something that was a little bit more Quebec-based in terms of indie wrestling and just indie wrestling overall. And so when we were thinking about the fact that we were going to do a 2-year anniversary show, we thought, well, let's throw in a little bit of the history of the Quebec radio wrestling scene. Let's throw in a little bit of how we got here in terms of this specific show, as we've had a crazy ride. Tony and I have known each other now probably, 12 years or so?
I think we met late 2004, if not early 2005.
Exactly. So Tony and I have a lot of stories from throughout the years. We've been actually in the same indie wrestling fed for many years at one point. That's where we met. Of course, we have a lot of stories, so we're going to touch on them throughout the show today, and some of them will be funnier than others. Others will make Tony cry. Others may get us sued. But, that's how we roll, because it is the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. And again, just to touch on what you were alluding to a moment ago, Tony, the time that I've spent, at least here on the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast, is I've seen the growth over the past, it's been about a year and a half, I guess, I've been in and around the show.
Joined January 2016.
That's it. That's when Tony came down to my dungeon, because I had a copy. I had a copy of the Jake the Snake Roberts DVD, and he was like, "I want to see it." So he came into my basement and dragged me out after.
There were no windows. That was kind of creepy.
Yeah, well, that's how it is. So today we decided we'll take a little bit of a trip down memory lane. We'll perhaps also give you a little bit of a history lesson on the Quebec radio wrestling industry and how that has come about over the past. Now it's been about 18 years since the beginning of what was the first ever radio wrestling show here in Montreal on the English radio airwaves.
Yeah, so then, so that's how I want to lead into it. Seeing as you are old man Rockamaniac, I want to start with you. Mm-hmm. I do want to start there. So, back in the day on the podcast, I used to start off with the softball question. And I'm going to go right now because I'm sure that's going to lead into the radio. But where does your fandom begin? Do you have that moment? Do you have that memory of when you first saw wrestling or when you first really became a fan?
I mean, the earliest memories that I would have would be the Saturday mornings CF 12 WWF Superstars.
Oh, yeah.
I would watch that shortly before departing to my grandparents for the weekend. And so that would be my first initial memories of getting in touch with professional wrestling, seeing the WWF Superstars on a weekly basis, and starting to get intrigued by that. And shortly thereafter, my grandfather took me to some live events here in Montreal at the Forum. Of course, the Forum was still open back then. People in Montreal may not even remember the Forum.
Old man Rockamaniac, as I mentioned.
Exactly.
Didn't the Forum stop having shows in 96?
It was around there.
Yeah.
And now I remember
Pat LaPrat is screaming into his computer right now.
Oh yeah, totally. It's all right. But listen, Pat and anyone else, we're as old as I am, and I think I don't know if Pat's older than me. He probably is, but it doesn't matter. My brain is extremely old. Okay, so I forget things, but I got enough memory in the bank here that we're gonna have a good overview generality. So I remember going to the Montreal Forum and watching events there and becoming a fan then, and as a kid becoming a big wrestling fan. It was funny, on Twitter the other day I saw a little bit of an interaction where it was like name one piece of wrestling merchandise that you bought as a kid that you're now ashamed to even admit that you had bought. And so I'm gonna tell you what my answer was, and then you're gonna have to answer, Tony. You're obliged now.
I'm legitimately thinking about it as you're saying it. What?
All right, so I was thinking about that, and I used to go to the house shows here in Montreal, and every time I would go, when my grandfather would bring me, and I remember I would usually get to at least buy one souvenir. Sometimes it was around my birthday that it was weird. They usually always had some sort of house show not too far around my birthday area. So it was like, oh, okay, I get to buy a piece of merchandise for my birthday gift. And so I used to buy all sorts of weird things. I had the foam urn at one point for The Undertaker, which is not to be ashamed of.
No, that's cool.
That's cool, right? I used to buy the foam hands and stuff like that. And I remember having a WWF, you remember the WWF CDs? Well, before that, they used to have cassettes that they sold at the house shows with like 4 or 5 songs on them. Oh, wow. And I remember buying that. I had that in my place. But the piece of merchandise that I was almost ashamed to mention that I had purchased as a kid was the Shawn Michaels heart-shaped sunglasses that were red and gold. And I posted a photo up on Twitter at the time, and I was just like, why would I have bought that? And so that just goes to show how much of a mark you can be when you're a kid.
Do you still have them is the question.
I wish I did. They would probably be worth money. But no, I've lost them along the way. The only thing I still have from a kid is a few wrestling figures, like 2 or 3, not much. That's all I have. It's unfortunate. I should have kept them all, but it's just along the way. I lost them along the way, so to speak.
Yeah, that's generally what happens. I'll be honest with you. Aside from Bret Hart's sunglasses, the pink ones, with the really cheap rubber band for like the backing.
Oh yeah, I had that as well.
Oh, we all did. If you lived here in Montreal, you had to have it. I mean, that was prerequisite. I didn't have much wrestling merch. I'll be very, very honest with you. So I'm trying to think, is there anything along the way that I may have bought that I was ashamed of? But you're talking to a guy that openly has a Power Ranger shelf in his office. So I'm telling you right now, there's nothing I'm really ashamed of. No. Honest to God, I'm really trying to think about it. I don't have much wrestling merch.
I also remember at one point I had the Razor Ramon necklace.
Ooh, that one. I put that one, unless you're Italian, that one is pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, so those would be the two pieces of like most embarrassing merchandise from when I was a kid, when I was a young
and buy them to you. Will you wear them at the same time?
As long as there's no photography, I will wear them for you. Yes.
Oh no. This would have to go all over the internet.
Okay, well then we have to get my mask from like our promotional photo, and then I will do that.
No, I'll get Angie Sky on that for you.
All right.
That's amazing. So, like, as a kid, your grandfather would take you to the shows and everything. When did you discover that there was independent wrestling? Because that's always a different story.
You know what? It's funny. I kind of discovered indie wrestling without even knowing it when I was young, and ultimately I didn't really get involved in terms of following indie wrestling on a normal basis until I was actually involved in the radio industry.
Okay.
But when I was younger, and I didn't know this at the time, I kind of discovered this a few years ago. Do you remember the WCW house show that happened here?
No.
Okay.
That would be well before my time.
Right. So it was Hogan versus Rougeau. And that was basically it was kind of hyped as a WCW house show. You had some top WCW talent. You had Hogan versus Rougeau. I know Nash was on the event as well. A few WCW guys. I could almost picture it. I remember being there and remember seeing on the screen WCW where the big boys play. And I remember I took a bunch of photos. I had like a disposable camera that day. But I didn't realize until recently when a few years ago, someone gave me a tape of the event and I started watching it and there was guys like Brick Crawford was on the show.
That's his fucking name. Hang on. This is a throwback to like 4 or 5 episodes ago. Brick Crawford did a stint in IWS.
Okay. Yeah.
Teaming with PCO.
Yes.
Holy shit.
Okay.
No joke. I'm so sorry to interrupt your story.
That's okay.
That has been on my mind for about a month.
Okay. All right. So.
And I don't have LACHOR anymore to just randomly call at 2 a.m. and be like, who was the middle-aged journeyman who teamed with PCO for a while at the Bogies days?
Oh, LACHOR, yes. We'll have to touch on him. I definitely miss him.
Big part of that. But anyways, please continue.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Say Brick Crawford. No, wow.
It's all good. Yeah. I was watching the tape. I started seeing it, and there was like Brick Crawford, and I think there's a few other indie guys that were on that show at the time because it was kind of like Rougeau that helped like organize it. So he had some local talent, but he got the WCW talent to come in as part of a deal. So that was indirectly an introduction to indie wrestling because, guys like that were, on the show, but I didn't even realize it at the time. Ultimately, I would not really get involved or see the indie wrestling scene until I was involved in the radio industry, probably. So it was starting around 2003 that I would have been seeing indie wrestling here in Montreal.
Wow. Oh, my gosh. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, typical of WCW, not even going out of their way to promote their own house shows.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, they barely used to run house shows, right? So it was always something that was interesting because it was an exciting event. Even recently they touched on Hogan and Rougeau because Rougeau went down to Hogan's shop and cut a little YouTube promo clip. And they were like touching on the fact that they had fought many years ago at the Montreal Forum Store. It was, or was that the Bell Center? I don't remember now. Anyways, it's so that for some reason, that's amongst the house shows that I actually remember. I don't remember the house shows that I like the results and everything. Like I've heard Pat LaPrat here on the show where he used to say, "Yeah, this house show had this main event," and I'm like, "All right, I don't remember these things." But there is only one, and you want a funny story? I'll give you a funny story. All right, there's only one funny story that that I remember from from being at the house shows, and I can't believe I'm going to tell this story, but it is what it is. It's because it's just one of the only memories that I have. It made me burst out laughing when I thought about it. So we were at a house show with my grandfather, and my grandfather, he liked to have a few drinks. Let's just say that. So,
really?
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me one bit.
Shut up, Tony. Anyways, it's all a gimmick, people. It's all a gimmick. Anyways, so this was around the time I think Goldust was popular and starting off in the WWE or WWF at the time. And so he came out doing his little freaking gimmick. And so my grandfather started mocking him, like literally like mocking how stupid and feminine he was acting. And then like yelled something stupid, like intentionally stupid to say like take it off. And everybody in the entire section started laughing. And for some reason, I'll always remember that. It's just something so stupid and small, but it was hilarious to think that my grandfather was once heckling Goldust for being a weird character. So that's a memory I'll always remember from the house shows is when I was a kid.
That's really cool. So then it sounds like I'm glossing over this, but so then what brought you to the radio?
Yeah, radio. So, I mean, when I was a kid, I used to be, very enamored with the radio industry. Where I used to sneak a little transistor radio into my bed and listen to that at night. I used to listen. Well, I mean, I remember listening to Ted Teven, the legendary Ted Teven. May he rest in peace. Late at night on CIQC. And 600 a.m. And sometimes, his show was supposed to end like at, I think like midnight or something like this. And he was still going on. He didn't care. He just like kept going. And I used to listen to him pretty often when I was young. And it was weird because it then became, when you're a kid and you say, what's your dream job? That basically what it became, because for some reason I was just enamored with Ted Teven. Later on, Mitch Garber, and guys like that who I used to listen to all the time, and that just became a passion for me. And I remember listening to those shows and thinking to myself, I'd love to do that. And it was something that became that like, oh, what do you want to be when I grow up? I wanted to be involved in some way in radio. And so when I was young, I used to, record myself on my stereo deck as if I was like a radio DJ and play music and do these type of things. Because it just became something I was so enamored with.
That's fantastic. So then being in love with it, when did the opportunity arise, or were you searching out that opportunity specifically?
Well, it's a funny story. Let's take it to 1999, where I happened to be listening to CIQC, and just so happens that I think it was on Ted Teven's show, actually. And so he introduces or advertises the fact that a radio wrestling show was going to be starting on the network on CIQC. And I was like, no way. That's amazing. Like, it combines the two things I love most in the world. I'm a young guy. I was like, just, I guess I was in my mid-teens at that point. So, I was just like, oh my God, that's awesome. I love professional wrestling. I love radio. This is really going to be cool. And so it was Aaron Amadeus who happened to be on the air that day. The good old AA, Aaron Amadeus. And so they advertised the fact that they were going to be on, I think it was Saturday afternoon it used to air. And so I tuned in immediately. Of course, the next, I think it was a day after, 2 days after, they were advertising the fact that the show was going to be airing. And of course, Aaron Amadeus had his on-air partner, Mark the Shark, who, as we'll get into the history of In the Ring as we go along. But as you could tell, Aaron Amadeus, which is actually not his real name either, it ended up, having a mix of a great radio wrestling show, but then at times kind of veered off and would have. I think Guppy touched on this during his interview a few weeks ago, where Aaron was great and had some great stuff, but at times would also veer off, and thus, we have guys like Mark the Shark on the show. But they had a run on CIQC. And then ultimately, CRQC was coming to an end, and so the show kind of went on into a little bit of a hiatus. And eventually, it would pop up on CFMB 1280 AM, and of course, it's a very Italian station here in Montreal, but happened to be a station that you could buy out some time, get some sponsors, and get on the air. Now, they would offer late nights, and it would be Friday nights and they had a show. So they started the show there. They moved it over. And, of course, later on, as you heard during the Guppy interview, Guppy would join. And it was Aaron Amadeus and Brian DeGuppy. That was like, the dream team at that time. And so over those years, I happened to be obviously not just a big fan of both radio and wrestling, but I was starting to get involved a little bit through third parties. Basically, you might remember this, Tony. Of course, MSN groups, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember this? Wrestling Talk. Were you ever a member of Wrestling Talk?
Rings a bell.
All right. So the spoiler once opened a MSN group called Wrestling Talk. And later on, we would have groups like 514wrestling.com. Okay. But before that, it was Wrestling Talk. And so that, of course, became very popular actually at the time, and would also have a little bit of an interaction with the show. And in the ring, I mean, Brian DeGuppy did a great job touching on a lot of the history of the show. So if you haven't already heard that episode, go back, listen in, tune in. He mentioned some of the side shows as well, of course, because the show became so popular on CFMB that eventually they also launched some spin-offs. Brian DeGuppy had Urban Talk with Manny T, and Aaron had eventually his own Montreal dating show, is what it was called. And, the Montreal dating show was really just 2 hours on a Sunday night at midnight of pure nonsense. And it was just funny. Because, I mean, it was the Attitude Era, right? So, that type of toilet humor and stuff like that was funny and interesting, especially to guys like myself, having been in that around that age of later teenager years. And so, the Attitude Era is running wild. And so that Montreal dating show, and of course, Guppy touched on the whole story where he spinned off and did his own show, which created Between the Ropes. So at that point, we have two radio wrestling shows here in Montreal with talking at the same time, basically, because at one point they were head to head. Later on, they were at different times. But the Montreal dating show, when it came to an end, the next Sunday, although it was not announced that the show was coming to an end, the next Sunday, Sports Weekly with Gabrielle Morency started. And for anyone who has followed Gabrielle Morency's career, know that I have been very close to him throughout the years. As he, I eventually opened his own little wrestling group, not wrestling group, but rather MSN group, ran a little bit of a website for him. That's how I started getting involved in his radio show. I was running that for him. Meanwhile, Aaron Amadeus decided that he would be moving out of Montreal to move down to Toronto, pursue some other business ventures, and sold the show to Paul Rossetti. And
good old Paul Rossetti.
Yes, good old Paul Rossetti. We will touch on Paul Rossetti. And so he sold the show to Paul, and Paul took over the show. And of course, some great characters that I have to give shout outs to, guys like Corkiti Krimis. Big shout out to him. I miss that dude. I have to get caught up with him. And also some other great characters. Rest in peace to Leprechaun Lee, as he unfortunately passed away a few years ago due to complications with diabetes. And also other great characters, Jimmy Fantastic on the show as well. I know you wanted to mention him on today's broadcast, Tony, as when we were talking about him during the SummerSlam review. And so all these characters kind of like had In the Ring going at that point in time. And so I was involved in Morency's show through his little group, and I ran his website. I was also becoming somewhat popular on the Wrestling Talk website at the same time. And some changes went down in the ring. Ultimately, Lee would leave, Corky would leave, and so some other guys would come in, and I'll touch on them in a moment. But Paul eventually expanded the show from 2 hours to 3 hours. And when he expanded it to 3 hours, it was somewhat of a, I guess, just a little bit of a way for him to spread his wings, so to speak. The first 2 hours of the show was kind of focused just on being somewhat of a professional radio wrestling show. But then the third hour, he decided to have a little fun, mix in some wrestling trivia alongside some nonsense, and continue along with that. So at one point in late 2003, Paul invites me in to come help out on the third hour. He says, "Hey, how about you come take part of with the third hour? Help me run the trivia show for a night, just for a night, because myself and my good buddy Jeff Extreme had been basically taking over that show for weeks on end with our characters and stuff. We used to call in with weird characters like Eric Cartman and stuff. So Paul says, "Hey, come in for a night." So I came in. I prepared a bunch of questions, and I went on air the first night. And much like we're talking now, I just sat down, started talking, and that was it. And only a couple of weeks later, and I have to give a shout out and a big appreciation to a guy that and we're gonna have some funny stories along the way here. JNDG Boy Johnson, because only a few weeks into my time where I was just trying to help out on this third hour, and he saw something in me and said, "I want you as my co-host." Jay happened to be the host of the show at that point in time, and he's like, "I want him as my co-host." And so only about 3 weeks in, I was like on the main show and on the co-host spot with Jimmy Fantastic and NDG Boy Johnson. And it was almost surreal, because I was sitting here in a shag-filled studio that was CFMB, behind a microphone on radio that was blasting across the city. And I said to myself, wow, it's, even though this is not an official job or anything like that, I'm living a dream, so to speak, because from the time that I was 7 or 8 years old, wanting to be on radio, I happened to be sitting there on radio, and then I got picked up to be the official co-host of the show, later somewhat of a host of the show, as along the way we had so much fun on that show. And there's so many side stories that we could touch on here, Tony, that when it comes to things on In the Ring and guys involved on In the Ring. JNDG Boy Johnson, you want to talk about indie wrestling connections, Tony?
Please do.
All right. So JNDG Boy Johnson once wrestled on a Jacques Rougeau indie event.
Okay.
And it would later influence IWS because of it. JNDG Boy Johnson fought a bear, a real live bear.
Is that the infamous bear pee incident?
That is the match that had a bear, and it was JNDG Boy Johnson against a bear on Jacques Rougeau's show.
Oh boy.
And I'm pretty sure that's what would later influence, of course, Beef versus a Bear. Beef Wellington at IWS.
Beef's long, summer-long feud with a bear.
I never got a confirmation that was the actual inspiration, but it must be, because we all have the Rougeau connection through the, Beef and Steen and Generico and so on and so forth. So that was an interesting fact that I think it came from there, for those who happen to remember that time in IWS. And of course, also the Rossetti family opened up CWA during my time in the ring. And of course, it was a great little family-run promotion. It eventually became the second biggest promotion here in Quebec at the time. I'm sure we all remember, Tony, the wars between CWA and IWS at the time.
Oh yeah.
It became something huge. It started off small, but it eventually picked up steam, and we, of course, were very closely tied because of the radio show. The fact that the Rossetti family ran both, and the wars became pretty intense between the two, and eventually, the falling out of CWA's management that really was pushing it to the top, Pat LaPrade included, eventually fell out with the Rossettis, and then CWA had its dark days, so to speak. I actually was a ghost booker for about 3 months of CWA. I remember this. I remember these times that I was just like, "Wow, okay, this is weird." I'm all of a sudden booking a indie wrestling show, and so along the way, in the ring, had such a big piece of history here in the radio wrestling industry, because it was not only the first place, but had so much spin-offs and so much influence on things in the indie wrestling scene that it really will always be remembered for its place in history. And so we I would be remiss though if I didn't, and before we get into the IWS stuff, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that my time at In the Ring was just an amazing time. It was not only an opportunity to live a dream, and a childhood dream, but I have to say thank you to the entire Rossetti family, not only for giving me the chance to get involved in that radio show, but also for everything they did. They treated me like family, and I couldn't. I've never gotten a chance to say thank you to them, so I do it publicly here on the show. And I remember hearing Paul Rosenberg's interview here on the show, talking about our time together, and so I'd be remiss if I didn't to mention that today here on the show. At this point in time, an in-ring, was ultimately coming to an end due to the fact that Paul and the family was deciding to move on from the wrestling business. CWA had come to an end. They were ready to move on and focus on other things. And I took it hard. And I think Paul alluded to that. I took it hard at the time because it was like, oh man, this is a piece of history that I've seen grow over. At that time, it was 7 years. It was my baby at that point because I was basically running the show week in and week out. And I mean, we would go on air every Thursday or Friday night. Later in its history, it was Thursday night, and we had nonstop calls for 3 hours straight, and we literally could have done 6 hours, and we still wouldn't have had enough time to touch in on everything that we wanted to touch on and talk to everybody. The popularity of the show was amazing during our run, and during the 7-year run that the show had. It's just crazy to think about the influences that it ultimately had on the indie wrestling scene and so much more. Of course, it would eventually lead to us meeting Tony at IWS.
That's right.
as of course, CWA during its later time, it kind of had a little bit of a association with our good friend PCP Crazy F and Manny. And Paul and I started working the IWS shows as the ring crew, and I think that's where we met.
No, that is effectively where we met. You, we bumped into each other. It was my first La Break show, and that's where I remember talking to you for the first time for real.
And it's fine. I think the answer was no, but you never really listened to the shows at that time, right?
No, not in the ring, unfortunately. I vividly remember listening to Aaron Amadeus and Brian the Guppy, simply because I was a little more conducive to the times I would be in a car listening to radio, because I'm a little bit younger than you, so radio was not a thing like kids my age were doing, or I didn't have that outlet. So, no, unfortunately, I hadn't. I had listened maybe 2 or 3 times. I just don't have memories of them, because I remember they had... guys were playing up some of the gimmicks that were happening on the show, or that some wrestler would be on to call out Manny or something. So those were the rare few exceptions I remember listening in, but I didn't remember like actual things. So when you and I first started talking, I didn't even know you were involved with radio whatsoever. I think what came my way was in I think the 2 or 3 months, like the death rattle of In the Ring. You would openly talk to me about it at IWS, so I came aware of it really when it was ending.
Okay, yeah. So that was, I think that was no. So that was around December to Dismember, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
because that was my infamous night where I had a discussion with Ryan Ryder, and we'll get to that in a moment. But our time at IWS, I mean, it started probably in 2005, late 2004, early 2005, like you were saying. Of course, we have to touch briefly on our time there, as we were part of the ring crew, but we did a little bit more than that. Just that, of course. I wanted to say that, you know, Lacor, that guy, man. That guy's done so much for Quebec indie wrestling, and it's crazy to think about how much that guy did for Quebec indie wrestling. And obviously, we see that with Kevin Steen and El Generico being in the WWE, partly thanks to a guy like Lacor, who did so much amazing work at the time promoting those guys. And Lacor, I remember him just like taking me a little bit under his wing, like, hey, come over here, we'll work with me. So like I kind of broke off from you guys at the ring crew, and I started like working at the merch table with Lacor, and Lacor ended up bringing me in on a lot of other projects with him. He used to run film festivals and stuff like that, so he used to bring me in and give me some side work on his festival stuff, and it was, it was IWS, of course, a great time just to be there in one of the hottest periods of the company's history, of course, it was there I met Guppy for the first time, and I had already met Aaron, I had already met everybody else, I had met Mark the Shark and everybody else from the in-ring history, but I never really met Guppy, and it was there that I would eventually meet Guppy. And Guppy, of course, Guppy, as you alluded to on his podcast here with us. You kind of alluded to the fact that obviously he had a lot going on. He used to book, he used to announce, he used to also do the DVD commentary. He was running around with his head cut off. And I think you remember this as much as I do, Tony. Not a specific incident, but Guppy was not necessarily the happiest of people.
I was going to call him an angry young man.
Yeah, I just remember like him being a fucking pissed off individual most of the time, and I was just like,
sweaty and angry were the 2 adjectives most people would use.
I was like all excited to meet Guppy, and I was just like, all right, he's a bit of an asshole. So that's of course I understand in retrospect, obviously, knowing, but
exactly, it's just one of those things. It's first impression, not not indicative of who he actually was. Because once everything got rolling and you could catch him in a quiet moment, nicest guy ever. But if he was determined, and if something wasn't going right, get out of his way.
Oh, totally. It's like, all right, oh boy, yeah. So most fucked up memory from IWS, though, I have two of them, and I'd like you to maybe perhaps share yours as well, Tony. So since we're touching on all this, I have two most fucked up memories. Obviously, anytime you're involved in a fans bring the weapons match.
Oh, I've got a good one for that.
That was just like one of my fucked up memories where, as I alluded to, I usually ended up at the merch table with Lackwar and helping him out with some stuff. So the first time I actually decided to go ringside for a fans bring the weapons match, and for those who have never seen an IWS fans bring the weapons match, it was basically like Tube City. As well as crazy contraptions with Thumbtack City, and
a thumbtack bejeweled Super Nintendo.
Yes, exactly. So, and we were at the medley at the time, and so the space around the ring was not much between the ring and the barriers, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you better put these goggles on and this hospital mask, because otherwise it's gonna hit you right in the face, the glass." I'm like, and you're gonna breathe it in, you're gonna die. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's how Manny described it. Yeah, so
yeah. And I'm like,
you're gonna breathe it in, and you're gonna die.
I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right. So, and I'm just like, okay, this guy's got to be overreacting. Like, come on, man. Like, it's Manny, right? So, Manny's a little over the top sometimes. So I was just like, nah.
Oh, he'll tell you he's always over the top. Not a little.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So
he'll put that over, brother.
Yeah, exactly. So he's like, no, you got to put on that shit. I'm like, yeah, all right, whatever. Don't worry about it. So I put it on. I put it on almost reluctantly because you remember like it used to be those cheap plastic.
We looked like
goggles.
Idiots. We looked like idiots.
Oh yeah, total. They're the worst dollar store goggles that I've ever seen.
Well, sidebar. Yeah. Manny came up to me that afternoon. I believe this was the first time that they got the goggles because I think the bar came down on them. Because the first couple of ones they didn't do that, but then after a while the bars started coming down on them. Like, you got to give some protection to the crowd and your boys. So Manny told me he drove into a Dollarama and he goes, I need 150 swimming goggles. And like the face of the guy going like, I don't know. And I think he ended up having to do like 4 or 5 different Dollaramas to finally get the entire 150. But it's just the fact that Manny, like, at that point, roided up, big, huge ass Manny comes in just asking for swimming goggles.
Yeah, exactly.
Just wrestling without context.
Yes. And hospital masks.
Well, that I don't know where those came from. That might have been stolen from somewhere.
Yeah. So, the fucked up memory that I have is like thinking like this can't be crazy. Like, so then the bell rings and 3.5 seconds in, I had my goggles on because all of a sudden 4 pieces of glass go click 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 against my thing, and I'm like, wow, okay, this is going to be something crazy. So yeah, and all I just remember is at the end of the night feeling like that I was dying just because it was just like already 700 degrees in the place, and being at ringside while you're in a literal war zone was like, okay, this is pretty crazy.
Fans Bring the Weapons requires a lot of movement on behalf of the ring crew. You're either dodging out of the way or you're dodging into the way to make sure whatever they're falling into is going to remain where it is to absorb as much impact as possible.
Oh yeah, and although not a Fans Bring the Weapons match, I remember a flaming table at the medley where I think it was Phantom and Manny. You know the spot that they always use in the video footage where Manny comes crashing down through the table.
Yep.
And then so I go to check on Manny, and I'm yelling at some other merch kid, like, "Dude, put the fire out!" And then I go to check on Manny, and I'm like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Where the fuck am I?" I'm just like, okay, all right, this isn't good. Anyways, but the other fucked up memory, and I don't know if we really want to touch on it. It's a whole, it's a dark time in Quebec indie wrestling.
No, please do. I mean, we gotta talk about everything, and I think I know where you're going with this one.
All right, so I remember
we've talked about him.
Yeah, I remember the show that was Kurt Lauderdale's last show. And I remember being there in the building that day, and the rumors, the fact that he may had murdered the girl, Shanna Poisson, and although I was not close or tight with any of the guys really on the roster at the time, the rumors were pretty abundant already, and the feeling there that day was pretty screwed up because with all the rumors that were going around, it was kind of like you don't know when the cops are going to bust in, and it was like feeling that the cops were going to bust in during the show and like shut it down, and like that was a crazy moment that I'm never going to forget because I know I was leaving right after the show to go to Buffalo to watch the Great American Bash with Paul Rossetti, and I just remember like, oh man, this is insane. They're gonna bust through the doors. You don't know what's gonna happen, and like it was a crazy moment that I'll never forget. Unfortunately, it's a dark moment. It's not something that it's kind of like the Chris Benoit thing. You don't really talk about it, but that match and him saying goodbye at the end of the match, it's just a moment that's burnt in my mind and burnt in my memory. I'll never forget that.
Well, for me, I think I've mentioned it before on the show. I was up on the second balcony for, I think it was Le Break, because that's where all that was going down. And not second balcony, there's only one. And I'm sure I was on the balcony, but I was next to Sean Radwanski, who was the photographer and Manny's right-hand man back then. And he just looks over at me, and I vividly remember him going like, and this wasn't his last show. It was the one right before all the rumors started circulating. So right before he committed the murder, he goes, "Man, look at that Kurt Lauderdale. That new costume, man. He looks like a serial murderer."
Oh, leave it to Sean to have the most.
And I'm like, "You're kidding me." When all that started happening, I was like, "Wow." And I looked and I brought it up to Sean, and he goes, "Yeah, let's not talk about that."
Yeah, no, exactly.
No. If anybody had suspicion, they shouldn't. Exactly. It was such a weird time, specifically because I remember all us younglings, we weren't of age, so Manny would occasionally round us up and be like, "All right, you see a cop, or we tell you get out, you go by this back exit here." Thinking like the cops wouldn't be checking a back exit.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I was of age, so I wasn't really involved in that. You guys and your Tumo crew.
Crew, and I think Shane. Yeah, Shane was underage.
Oh yes, that's true. That's right. And also, on a very positive note, for those who don't know about IWS, like our time there, Tony, like it was not only awesome,
time of my life,
but you'll hear horror stories about indie wrestling, right? Normally about wrestlers, okay, and about not getting paid, or getting stiffed, or whatever it may be, right? Getting screwed over, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. We were ring crew, and I remember this. I was like, Little Brown Joe comes around, he starts giving out envelopes. I'm like, are you seriously giving me an envelope? Like, we were ring crew, and they were paying the ring crew at the time.
Damn straight.
I was just like, see, that's how classy this promotion is. So, that gives you a little bit of information about how great that company was at that time. They treated everyone well, and it was insane. And it was an insane situation to be involved in. But it was really cool, and it was really an awesome place to be at the time. And of course, I'm sure there's fans listening in the U.S. that know about IWS, and that gives you a little look in on the company at the time when you and I happened to be involved in it, and that would lead, of course, eventually to where we would actually, at least as far as radio is concerned, actually work together for the first time, but not before I started at my second, let's say, address on the radio dial. As
before you get into that, you do get into that, I do want to talk about us.
Yes,
as the old couple that we are.
Yes,
I do want to point out one of the reasons why I gravitated towards you. I was very different from the Tumo crew.
Oh yes, absolutely.
The Tumo crew. I was the non-pot smoking, barely beer drinking. I was there because I'm like, I don't want to fuck up. Right. I actually want to do a good job. Meanwhile, the other kids were kind of like, oh yeah, well, we'll get it done. Let's just we're gonna take 10 minutes and go smoke a joint. And listen, they did nothing wrong. There's some of my oldest friends, Sean Hines, Drunken Dog, Mike Desjardins. If anybody knows that name, good on you. Sean Laren, Kirby, all of these guys. they were all really cool, but I gravitated more towards you and Felix, or Lex Lerman, as he's known nowadays, because you guys were the I'm not going to say more mature, but more feet on the ground. Let's get the job done, and then let's enjoy a fucking show.
Oh yeah, I remember showing up early. I remember working my ass off.
Well, I remember when I stopped going with them, and thankfully my parents would give me lifts, even though I was underage going to a bar. You and I very often were the first two guys there.
Oh yeah,
very
exactly.
fucking often,
especially
no ring,
Bogey's
nothing.
World.
Well, Bogey's World, we just had a lot of shit that we could fuck around with, because half the time the CWA ring wouldn't be down because IWS and CWA shared the venue really at the death of CWA. And then the Bogies had that fantastic basement that always smelled like beer and urine.
Yes.
Oh my god. So that's where I hope that's where you got to know me and were like, yeah, this kid wouldn't be so bad one day. But
I mean, you obviously I similar thoughts in the sense that obviously I associated myself a little bit more with you. I was already close with Paul. Paul was there, of course.
Yep, Paul was there.
And then of course I was close with Lacor. But yourself, Lerman as well a little bit, but obviously more yourself, because I could tell you're a little bit more down to earth type of guy that had a little bit more of a similar type of thought process that I do. So it was like, this guy seems pretty cool. And so I guess that, and even though at the time I don't remember you ever really talking about wanting to be in radio at that time, obviously by that time you knew I was involved.
Yeah.
So I talked about it, but I remember you really telling me that you wanted to get involved in it.
That was my problem. And I think Guppy picked up on it. It's so fucking weird. My problem in life is I'm a go-getter and I try to do things on my own. And when I have something on my mind, I don't generally talk about it. It's like I have an aspiration for something, and for some odd reason, I have trouble vocalizing it or reaching out to the people that would likely facilitate it for me. And I try to do it on my own, or, stupidly, uneducatedly wish for it, and it, working off to the left when I should clearly be to the right. And that was one of the things. And Guppy, believe it or not, after our interview, he and I started talking a little bit more and really catching up. Like, I swear to God, that could have been a 7-hour show, how much we talked. He just leans in and he goes, Tony, if there's one thing in life you got to do is take your room. You want something? If you know somebody who has it, don't be so polite. Go and get it. And I think that was one of the things, because I fully knew you were there. There were plenty of times I would have been like, I would have... maybe I was too shy to ask, but if you would have asked me back in the day, hey, you want to come on in the ring, just check it out for a night, or do you want to do this? You have no idea the backflip I would have done as a kid.
That's it. Because usually it was early Saturday when we were in the venue, which means I was up late Friday doing the show. So I'm coming straight off of that. And, whether it be the interview I did the night before or something like this, I'm thinking about that. Obviously, you know how I prepare for a show and then analyze the show and so on and so forth. So
just rip it apart.
Yeah, you know how I am with that. So I would have been thinking about it all day, probably that time as well. So it was weird. We never really talked about it, but I don't remember exactly how it eventually even came up. I remember we are going to tell the story about how I gave birth to Tony Stabile, but
someone else takes credit for it, but yeah. But here, let's not bury the lead.
Okay, so let me get into my transition, and then we'll get into obviously how we got you there. In-ring came to an end. And as I alluded to earlier, it kind of crushed me a little bit because I really loved it so much that I, didn't want it to come to an end. It was my childhood dream, so to speak, to be involved in radio. And I felt like, I was gaining a little bit of experience and saying to myself, well, maybe I could spin this experience eventually into something. So I thought about maybe, going to communications and stuff like that in my personal life for it to take it to the next level, because then I would actually have some experience. But we'll keep the personal life out of it. And obviously that never really came to fruition for whatever various reasons that I don't need to divulge onto the air.
I was in communications. You didn't miss anything.
Yeah, well, there you go. But at the time, of course, there was another radio wrestling show. And of course, there was Guppy's show. And I think I tried to get feelers out to that side, but I didn't really have, I think, a direct contact for him. And because this was late 2006, it was December to December, or was it 2007?
I'll be honest, I don't remember at this point. I think it was still in high school, so it would have to be late 2006, December
Yeah,
2006.
I think, yeah, that's right. It was late 2006 that In the Ring came to an end. I remember that last episode. Oh man, it was rough. But to say goodbye to that, and then I then said, okay, well, what am I going to do? Of course, one of my co-hosts at the time was, well, we had a gimmick name for him. It was Supernova. His name was Justin. And of course, Ryan Ryder had his own show as well. It was called Main Event. No, at the time it was Ringside Radio, I think, or Ringside Report. No,
Ringside Radio.
Yeah, Ringside Radio. Okay, so I don't know if he had switched the name to Main Event Radio. I think he had. He had already switched the name to Main Event Radio, and I'm sure he's going to send me a text now and be like, "Oh yeah, this is when it happened." I know. Okay, it's all right, but
semantics.
I had tried to get feelers out to Guppy's side to see if I could get involved. I think I was trying to get Morency to get the feeler through, because Morency was on 990 at the time. And of course, I touched on it earlier. Morency and I have been close throughout his career. Now he's in Toronto, and even when I go down, he brings me into the studio that he works at, the Fight Network. And it's, he and I have been very close throughout the years. So I tried to get feelers out through him, but ultimately, that did not come to fruition, and I then started having discussions with Ryan. And little did I know at the time as well that my co-host, Justin, happened to have discussions also going on with Ryan to possibly join his show. And so I remember this because, and you're going to love this because knowing Ryan and having worked with Ryan, you're going to be like, oh, that is so Ryan.
I can already picture it.
Yeah, the night of December to Dismember, I get a phone call, and I happen to be at the Barassa Sports Bar. And Ryan and I already knew each other. We had seen each other many times throughout the years. Of course, him having his own show, I having my show with Paul, the indie wrestling scene. We had seen each other. We had known each other for years. We had gone to indie shows. I remember seeing AJ Styles and Kevin Steen in St. Hyacinth in the middle of nowhere. Okay. And that photo I sent you a few weeks ago of me and Jimmy Fantastic and Ryan and all that was at that show. And so Ryan and I had a little bit of at least knowledge of each other. And so he calls me that night because I think we had exchanged messages maybe online to discuss possibly coming over. So he calls me to do basically what was a 45-minute interview on the phone.
Yep.
And
at 2 in the morning?
No, I was waiting for the pay-per-view to start. So I'm at the Barassa Sports Bar.
That's right. Mine was 2 in the morning.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, yeah. Anyways, we'll get to that in a moment. Yeah. So he calls and he starts talking to me, and we discuss the possibility of me coming onto the show. We talk about a few different other things about how we vision the show running, and also just wrestling in general. He had me on a 45-minute basic interview, basically a job interview for 45 minutes, and he then would eventually make his decision. And little did I know at the time, but he was talking to Paul Rosenberg, and because he was also talking to Nova, my co-host, and he was trying to decide as to who he should take on the show, myself or Justin, because he had a spot for one, and he was willing to bring one on. So he was talking to Paul and saying, well, I don't know, who do you think I should bring on? I don't know if Paul told. I think Paul told this story a little bit on the show. If not, then I don't remember if it was. I remember him talking about this recently. Anyways, Paul said to him, like, well, if you take Steve likes to be a little bit more in control. So he's a little bit harder to deal with because he has a certain vision on things. If you take Nova, he's going to work a little bit more with you. And that wasn't to bash me. He was just being honest with Ryan. And in retrospect, and I totally agree with that opinion that Paul had as
AKA you're an asshole.
Oh yeah, I am. I especially when it comes to the show, and I know that, I know I'm probably right, and you and I would eventually see that, but so he eventually decides to take me. He contacts me and he says, "All right, I'd love to have you on the show." So In the Ring finished in mid-December, and I think I started in mid-January with Ryan. And it was actually the first week of January. So I started with him, and people said it wouldn't last a week. Like everybody who knew me from In the Ring, everybody who kind of knew us from indie wrestling, whether it be in CWA or IWS, that actually knew about Paul and knew about Ryan and knew about both shows. Guys like Jimmy Fantastic, who ended up on Ryan's show at one point in time. Guys, a lot of guys ended up over there. Corky and all them also ended up over there when Ryan launched the show. So everyone said it's not going to last a week. Steve's going to quit. Steve's going to hate this. There's no way in hell, or you're just not going to be able to deal with him, and you're going to have to fire him. And so it was in many ways, because Ryan obviously being the lead of that show was like very proud of what he was doing and very proud of his status on that show. And I was obviously the kingpin on In the Ring, even though Paul, and I give credit to Paul eventually gave me the reins and just let me run with it. And I thank him once again for that. He obviously allowed me to become the kingpin of the show. I ran the entire show every week. Every single minute of that show was planned by me. Every execution of it was planned by me. It's just when Paul would then absolutely want something stupid, a la Aaron Amadeus, and have his friends rant about something really dumb, that we would have a fight. and you would know why, because it obviously we would have that problem eventually with Ryan. So he brings me on, and they said, well, it's not going to last a week. So we do the first show. It goes pretty good. We do the second show, third show. It goes pretty good, and we start building something. And we were able to get that show to a different level in terms of its execution. I think that at the time, Ryan and I actually made a good team at the time to really change up on how we ran. We were constantly, and I remember I actually read this back not too long ago. It was a few days ago. Knowing that we were preparing for this show, I kind of looked back on some of the history. I sent you some clips. I also happened to read an article that was in the Montreal Gazette that it was written about CJLO, which was the station that the show was on. And it was funny because they said, oh, well, during the commercial break, you see Steve Rockamaniac Wilson and Ryan Ryder discussing how a certain segment went long and the other segment, and how they were going to adjust the format in order to compensate, and how it was just pure professionalism, and that was quite a compliment to be in the Montreal Gazette being put over like that. And I remember that article at the time. So at first, Ryan and I, it went very well. And I was glad to have an opportunity to still be involved in the show and be involved in radio wrestling in Montreal. Eventually, of course, the station would actually be on AM. At first, it was more of a local station on the internet, and as well as within the Concordia buildings. But then it actually launched on AM, and so the show was gelling pretty well. And there would be small bumps along the way, though. And Ryan and I didn't always see eye to eye on certain things when it came to some other co-hosts. I'm sure as he's probably listening to this, he starts to laugh to himself because he's going to be like, good times when, like me and Gavin, the loose cannon, didn't really get along, or me and Viz at times didn't get along. Eventually, I really, really loved Viz. Shout out to the Viz. Viz and I saw eye to eye. He and I really knew, excuse me, how things should be played out and how things should be discussed, and would eventually tag team against Ryan when trying to, prepare things. But at times, Ryan and I would butt heads because of other guys that he wanted to bring on the show. So we were having a good time overall, though. And so a year passes, 2 years passes, and everything's going generally well. And people were surprised to see the fact that I was still there and everything was going very well. And then at I think, I forget who it was that left the show, but we happened to have the opportunity to bring someone else on. And I thought of you. And I don't know how I thought of you exactly. And Ryan's going to say, no, it was my idea. No, it wasn't, Ryan. I suggested it to Ryan that we bring you on and try out, because somehow I guess we eventually had that discussion, Tony, that you were involved. I remember that I'm the one who sent you the message eventually and said, hey, would you like to come in and, sit in on the show and see a little bit and maybe take part a little bit? And you're like, yeah, absolutely. And so I pitched it to Ryan. I'm the one who pitched it to him. He says otherwise. He remembers otherwise, I think. But I remember this vividly. I'm the one who pitched him and suggested you as the new co-host, because I knew, having talked to you at IWS, that we got along very well. And so apparently he gave you a 2 a.m. interview. Is this what you're telling me?
Oh, yeah. And just to point out, I've never answered a text message faster unless it was a booty call at that age. I do remember. I don't remember the conversation we did. I don't remember an in-person conversation before that text.
That's the other thing. I don't remember this.
I don't remember. Maybe we were both really blackout drunk and doubtful at IWS, but you know what I mean.
We got hit on the head by something from Manny, probably.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A ring post.
Yep.
But what it was is I remember that text, and then me answering immediately, and then I remember the conversations you and I had. But yeah, essentially what it was is you then gave my number or my email, one of the two, to Ryan, who sent me a marathon length message saying, no, it's such and such. This is really important. This is a big opportunity. And he threw in the word kid. And I had known Ryan here and there. I'd say we probably exchanged maybe 4 or 5 very short conversations over the years that we had met beforehand, naturally, because, Paul would point him out, then and then, when he'd be at an IWS show or an indie show, that I'd be there with Paul. So another big shout out to Paul, naturally. I think, he's an instrumental, I can't even talk anymore, immeasurable in his hand, I believe, for both of us, I'm going on a tangent here, because I'm going to put over Paul. A lot of people, and Paul knows it, a lot of people get annoyed with Paul. But there are a few people that actually, through interpersonal relationship and what Paul has done to me and around me, I have the world's most respect for Paul. He's always been a straight shooter with me, at the very least. That set aside whatever he may have had with other people, I wasn't a part of it. I don't give a shit. Paul has always been a fantastic human being to me, and I'll always love Paul and respect Paul for that.
Yeah, I saw Paul. I've seen Paul grow up. That's what's kind of weird.
Yes.
Even though, because when I first used to hang out with him and deal with him through Ring to Ring, when they really brought me in almost as an extended member of the family, of their family, in the sense that they really took care of me. I used to go on trips with them, to wrestling events, all on the in the ring dime, so to speak. And I saw Paul when he was young, an annoying little twerp, and I think he'll even admit that
with the hair,
or even before the hair.
Really? I thought he was born with that hair and decided to cut it off eventually.
No, exactly. So and I used to think, oh my God, you're so fucking annoying. But overall, I got along with him. And but I saw the kid grow up into, and then all of a sudden now he has a kid that's and I'm like, man,
that's creepy. Whenever you think of somebody in an isolated age,
yeah,
like at Paul at 17.
Oh yeah, it's
and
like
then you think about he's a parent. There's a cold shiver that goes down your spine, but the same shit goes for a lot of people I know.
Oh no,
a lot
totally.
of people, because I really do feel a lot of times you kind of mentally like freeze at a certain age when you've met somebody. Mm-hmm. So you'll always remember, I'll always remember Sean Hines as a dumb 13-year-old stoner kid. Mm-hmm. But now here we are in our late 20s. The guy probably has, 4 kids and a wife and all that stuff. I haven't talked to him in forever. That's bullshit. That's a lie. I don't know. But you know what I mean? So it's the same thing for Paul. And yes, Paul has had a great amount of maturing. Let's not put that aside either.
Oh no, absolutely. So yeah, and obviously the connections through us that would eventually lead to that text message, right?
Yeah. So then that brings me back to the interview. Anyways, so Ryan reached out to me, and pretty much laid the groundwork, and then I came in and we did that one day where I wasn't even technically on air. Because, I don't know, the CJLO rules and all that. And, we did have to keep that kosher. So you guys kicked me out of the studio so I could call in. And Ryan and then asking me.
What?
Oh, yeah. You kicked me out of the studio. I was in the stairwell. And then Ryan comes back and gives me shit because there was an echo. I'm like, the only place I could have been was the stairwell. I wasn't at Concordia yet. I was still in CJEP at the time. I had no idea where the hell I was.
I don't know what rule this was, though, but okay.
Yeah, I think it's because we hadn't vetted the fact that I was a guest. Nobody had warned CJLO that an outsider was coming. Whatever it was.
Oh yes, the security desk downstairs. Yes, that used to be fun.
Whatever that may be. By the end, the guy just gave zero shits.
Yeah. Here's the key.
I loved him. Yeah, exactly. I love that guy. I to this day. I have never loved a guy that much that I've said maybe 5 words to in 7 years. That being said, where was I going with? Anyways, so he kicked me out, and Ryan asked me what was the difference in heat between Randy Orton and The Miz, and I dissected that. Anyways, it probably sounded really stupid. I hope that episode is lost to the ages. Anyways, that being said, that night at 2 a.m. I had just gotten back from a date, so I remember I was in my driveway. I had just pulled up. My phone rings, and it's Ryan.
Oh God!
And which I would learn, and I think maybe you felt this too, is a thing with Ryan. He's a night owl.
Oh yeah, we'll eventually get into. We're not going too much longer, but we will touch on the 2 a.m. show prep between the 3 of us.
Yes. Oh yeah. Fuck yeah. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so Ryan called me, and he's all like, so talk to me. Like, what do you want me to talk to you about? He goes, what do you like? And then he goes,
what do you like?
And then he goes, I see on Facebook you have a Power Rangers picture. I love the Power Rangers. I know everything about the Power Rangers. And he actually said it that way. And the inner nerd in me screamed. And this is not a knock at Ryan. It's just I'll be honest, I fucking know a thing or two. I don't fly that flag, even though I admitted it earlier. But, the nerddom in me is pretty powerful. And so, he would talk about stuff, and, he got a lot of things right that he was saying, factual things. Not opinion-based, but factual things. And then, occasionally I'd chime in and correct him, and then there would be a debate, and then I'd have to remind him there's a difference between opinion and fact. And then by the end of it, he goes, okay, that's really good. You're starting next Sunday as the intern. Thanks, bye, and hung up.
Okay.
I was like, okay. Yeah. And then little did I know that was a thing. Mm-hmm. That was a reoccurring gag. And I remember sending you a message when it got done, being all like, hey, so this just happened. And I think your reply was, welcome to the show.
Yeah, because all his little gimmick names for people, I was just like, I don't care. He's the co-host. Intern my ass. It's like that. I want you as my co-host. That's kind of like what Jay did with me back in the in-ring days, so we could tie all that back in. What Jay did with me, I did with you.
Well, didn't I host a show solo 3 months into it because that was 1 week where you weren't available and Ryan just didn't wake up?
Something like that.
There was something
yeah.
like that, and I ended up, and then Ryan messaged me, he goes, "That's the fastest from intern to host I've ever seen." And it was
you had the
like,
exact same path
I'm
as I
sorry.
did. Exactly.
Exactly. And I just replied to Ryan, I'm like, I'm sorry. I was physically there, and I had no idea because nobody was answering their phone. So I was just like,
Right.
all right, let me do what people have shown me to do.
Yeah, that's it. So,
and I hope that show is lost to the ages as well.
So yeah, I mean, you had the exact same path, and I mean, you came onto the show, and you and I gelled very well on the show right away. Much like we have our discussions here and have our fun, you and I gelled very well, and then eventually we started to have just trouble dealing with Ryan, and. Before Ryan goes off on anything and starts like, oh, like, why are you saying this? This is not necessarily a bash. This is a personal opinion, just because overall, like I said, they said it wouldn't last a day. It lasted multiple years. Ryan and I had a multi-year run together, and we didn't always see eye to eye when it came to certain show prep, and it got to a point where. I used to prepare all the paperwork, right, Tony? I used to do all the news and rumors. I used to set all that stuff up, right? I would even propose, like, okay, we'll do this. Then, of course, late Saturday night, Ryan would start sending out emails and be like, okay, what are we doing for tomorrow? Are we talking about this? Are we talking about that? And he starts promoting. And I had no problem with that. We started discussion. But then... as you would see, it's like he kind of throws this idea completely out of left field, and then it becomes a huge freaking online debate where it's 27 emails pass between 10 minutes because we're basically arguing. we're not arguing, but we're like having this heated email exchange, trying to prepare the show. Because I'm setting my ways and he's setting his ways, and you are siding with me completely because you know that you totally agree with what I was saying, and you were just staying out of it and not saying much because that was the smart thing to do. But you were texting me saying, "Oh my God, you're so right."
Well, the thing is like I'd stay out of the main conversation because that's not me at that point. For website purposes, I was still an intern or third man, so
I
had nothing to do with
associate producer.
Exactly, no content producer.
Oh, okay, yes.
Let me put that out there. But that was the thing, and here's the thing. And once again, it's not a knock at Ryan because he's been able to make it work. He's been able to make his style work for however long Main Event Radio has been going, minus the years that it disappears and the weeks that it's randomly not there. Mm-hmm. What it is you and I very much like to have these things planned out, especially if we're doing a Sunday morning show. 99% of the news you're going to talk about is already 3 days old. It's already happened. There's in pro wrestling, very rarely do you have a Saturday night breaking news. So to add or change something to the show at 2 a.m. Sunday morning, like, even me logically, I'd be like, that doesn't make sense. Here we already have the entire program planned out. We got that done Saturday morning. If anything needs to be added, because yes, things happen on Saturday. Emergencies, accidents, double homicide, suicide happens. All of that does. But that is exceptional work. So when you've gone out of your way, or I've gone out of my way, to compile all the news and rumors and send it to him Saturday morning with a tentative plan, the fact that you only get back to a human being at 2 a.m. creates for those, as you nicely put it, heated email exchanges. It's a fact that you and I, like, I don't know if you had this, but I think maybe you're even the one who told me to do this. My thing is I would just start scouring Sunday night. I'd open up the computer, go check the news, go check my sources and all these, and I would start building the news and rumors.
Oh, yeah.
Then come Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and by then it would be like 20 pages. All right, let me go and edit out what's been updated, what's really not relevant, what's not worth talking about. And then, hey, your life is easy because you've just turned what a 90-minute wrestling show for the news and rumors. Let's be honest. If you're really scouring through it, if you do it in one shot, let's say on the Saturday, you're aiming at a 2.5, 3 hour job just getting news bits without vetting, without making sure that these things are right or wrong or anything of the sort. So it's minimum of that. But if you do it every night, at the end of the night, you're turning that job into 20 minutes a night, no problem.
Yeah, that was my show prep on In the Ring, and I eventually kept it going on Main Event, and I showed that to you. And Ryan had a different type of approach to the show.
Well, it was the last minute.
You know, and this is just ultimately what it became was what people always told me at the beginning, where like you and Ryan are not going to see eye to eye. And overall, my run with Ryan, I had a very good time with him. Overall, it was near the end that it started to become very frustrating because it just the fact that we approached the show two different ways, it became a little bit tiresome dealing with that situation. Then, of course, also I had some life events happen that kind of shifted my focus away a little bit. And I had to deal with some of that stuff. So I contemplated taking away time off from the show, and but I ultimately never really full time came back because I never found that I guess motivation to do so, because I remember all those Saturday nights that pulling my hair out, 27 emails, and said to myself, I don't want to deal with that right now. And I don't think I can get enough strength to deal with that again. So that's not a bash at Ryan at all. We're two different people. We approach the show two different ways. And as I alluded to earlier in today's show, I always was that way with radio, because it stemmed from when I was a kid. And listening to all these great guys, all these great professionals, Ted Teven, Mitch Garber, later on, Gabrielle Morency. Those were major influences for me when it came to my time in radio, how I approached shows, how I wanted to approach my on-air wording about, mentioning the call letters, mentioning the station number, having an intro and an outro of every segment. All these things were stuff that I specifically developed in my mind over the years. And so I like I said, I openly admit I'm just as stubborn as he is. And so he could probably bash me and say, well, yeah, he was like impossible to work with. That's fine. I have no problem with that either. But I just eventually didn't muster up the strength to go back to deal with that. And so I was kind of off the grid, off the radar. And so to tie everything back to the original thing, and much like you did with the 6 Degrees of Guppy, we now get to Rowdy Wrestling because, I start thinking about Ted Teven all the way back when I was a kid, and that connects eventually to Aaron Amadeus on In the Ring, and that eventually connects, to Paul Rossetti and to me, and then myself to, of course, Ryan Ryder's show, and along the way, CWA to IWS, myself, I meet you, and I brought you to, of course, the Main Event radio game. And now, many years later, you decided and to eventually leave Main Event Radio as well. You stayed on the show after I left.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that.
Yes, and that's what I was wanting to give you the opportunity to. So tell me how your time was there after I left the show.
Well, when you were leaving, what's really funny is that was also around the time that Ryan... I don't know what was going on with Ryan's life or anything of the sort. I do know he was going through some stuff. So Ryan was hit or miss week to week. And so when you left, it really came down to either co-hosting with Ryan or going solo. Mm-hmm. And
There was a small period of time where you and I were just doing it alone.
Yeah.
That was fun too.
That was a lot of fun, and
That
I
was
miss,
the prelude to this.
Yeah, I really do miss having a studio. I enjoy being able, you and us being able to text each other and be like, "Hey man, let's go at 9:30. Oh shit, I'm late. Let's go 9:45." And we don't have to physically be somewhere. We don't have dues. We don't have to wait for a show before or after. But talking about shows before, that was it. You and I would always show up ridiculously early. And then before us, there was a show at that point called Sunny Side Up with Adam Avrashi.
Mm-hmm.
Really awesome guy. I love him. He's now a producer for CBC, which is, I'm so proud of that guy. So awesome. Really great ginger kid, as I pointed out many times. And sometimes I just like go and sit in the studio because it just had the comfier couch. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't want to bother you. Do you mind if I just sit here? I'm just doing show prep. And then one time, I think he was just running out of material. He motions me, come sit at the mic, and then we plug Main Event Radio, and he just had me on for like the last segment and a half of the show. Then he goes, "Hey man, yeah, I'm having trouble filling up this hour and a half because of you guys. Because at CJLO they really like round time, so they'll either only give you an hour or 2 hours. But Main Event came in at a time before Brian Joseph being the program director. Shout out to Brian Joseph, love the guy.
Yes, absolutely great guy.
Blackest guy with the whitest name."
True.
You'll be the first one to tell you. Anyways, if you bump into Brian Joseph ever, he's still at CJLO, not as program director. He's moved on to other funner, bigger projects for him, but he still does Geektastic Cypher. So check that out on CJLO, free plug, because I love Brian so much. Anyways, so he had 90 minutes, and he's like, I kind of have trouble filling 90 minutes. They only wanted to give me 90 minutes if I took the Sunday morning time before you guys. So he's like, come on and like do whatever. So I think I started doing weird news with him. And then eventually he's all like, well, listen, I'm graduating and I'm leaving. They asked me if I had any replacements for the show. So he goes ahead and he gave me that hour and a half before Main Event Radio. So now at this point, I was doing 3 hours of radio every Sunday morning, whether Ryan was there or not, or you were there or not. So on my solo weeks, I would do 3 hours of what started off as called Easy Sundays, where it was myself and I had a co-host, Chris Hanna, another amazing guy. I think he works for the Toronto Star now, doing copy editing. And so it was myself and him. Then he disappeared, so I turned that into the Stabile show, which we're going to talk about that name in a minute. Because you didn't give the full origin.
Oh yeah, sure. I'm also gonna have to give the origin of Rockamaniac.
Yeah,
as well.
That's right. So you're going to name us both. Anyways, So at that point I was doing both shows, and then Ryan. Oddly enough, I messaged Ryan. I go, "Hey man, you've missed like 6 shows in a row. What's going on with you?" And as I email him that, I email Brian Joseph, and I go, "Hey Brian, I won't be there this week. I don't know what's up with Ryan, so I don't think there's going to be any content on this Sunday. But here's a replay of my show for Main Event Radio. I guess you have an archive you can pull from that." He replies back to me, goes, "Well, Ryan just quit, saying the show was done." I actually messaged back and I'm like, "That's news to me. I've been doing it for 5 weeks." And he just messaged me, goes, "Well, the time is yours." So essentially, I became owner of 3 hours, or not owner, but responsible for 3 hours of content on Sunday mornings. And I just replied back to him. I'm like, "Hey, can I drop the first hour and just do 2 hours?" And that's when the Stabile show morphed into something that you came on a couple of times by telephone, where we had an In the Ring segment. Which created a little bit of drama with Ryan after a couple of weeks because he tuned in randomly or got wind of it. And we'll talk about that if you want. But regardless, so that's how you and I continued a little bit. And I did that for, I'd probably say, close to a year. And it became very difficult because I was doing all of that by myself. And CJLO was in this very weird stage at that point. Where they were regressing as opposed to like expanding and growing. And so it just became an area where I just didn't feel like I wanted to be a part of it anymore. So I put an end to the Stabile show, and I think that was a 9-month period before Main Event Radio came back, which I'll just touch very quickly. Ryan messages me after I had been hounding you, which I'm going to point out there and put that on the internet. I had been hounding you about us doing something on our own. and you were still in that spot where you weren't ready to do things, and that's all.
Yeah,
right.
I think I co-hosted an entire show via phone with you.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I remember.
Or we did an entire, but that was a WrestleMania preview or
that's
review,
it. Yeah, I
one of the
remember that.
two, where I was like, well, this deserves 2 hours of content rather than 20 minutes, one segment. But that being said, so at the time, Ryan reached back out to me going, oh, hey, there's this local internet radio station where we can have whatever time we want, 2 hours. We'd have a producer as opposed to producing ourselves. We'd have this, we'd have that. They're going to do some promotion work. They're going to get some graphics. That was Web Sports Media. And the producers there, this is where we throw some names and thank people. Eric Gregory, Matt Fish, Klondike Cat, or Cat Campbell, or however you want to call her, whatever she's doing right now up in the northern bitter cold asshole world of northern Canada, whatever she's doing up there. Props to you, Cat. I'm always proud of you and I love you. Those producers, along with Coach K, those people were really awesome at Web Sports Media and made chicken salad out of chicken shit. They shined shit, whatever the expression might be. They turned absolute garbage in an absolute garbage facility with absolute garbage management. I'm throwing them under the bus because they're all just pure assholes. Every one of them, and none of them are going to get named. They're just real pieces of shit. Anyways, making them work for almost nothing. And Jimmy Murphy, who's just an asshole to all producers. I know he's down in Boston doing radio there now, but the guy's an asshole. Anyways, this is the burying portion of the show. We did that for a little while, and many a time, once again, after I'd say about 3 months, Ryan started to peter out of energy, and so it would be up to myself and Elan, but Elan as well, the Viz, or as he wanted to be known as the Prize at that point. He petered out as well.
Influences.
Yeah, exactly. He petered out as well. So I was doing a lot of main event shows solo. I brought in Pal Marino, who's going to get major props when we start talking about Rowdy Wrestling in the very beginning of it. Yeah. So once again, it came down to me really having to take all of this on my shoulders, and what made it easy was naturally all those producers: Eric, Matt, Kat. Occasionally, Coach helped out, which then brought me to the hockey radio shows that I was doing last year and the year before, which is really awesome. We'll talk about that another time. But it for me, and I'm not trying to bash Ryan, and no matter what some people, our mutual friends or acquaintances, might get into his ear afterwards and say, "Oh, Tony totally buried you on the show." Whatever his issue was, I was left high and dry. I really was. And I put that on my back. And I was going bald at that time. So I'm going to say, I'm going to blame partly him now that I'm bald as a cue ball. That was a lot of work. And I loved main event radio. Like, no idea. Because much like you, I was living my dream. And for that, that weird 9-month period where main event radio and the Stabile show went away, I was just angry. I had no creative outlet. I had it really pissed me off. I felt I was really in a rut in life and all of that. Even though that, this is unfortunately not our day job. We're not making millions of dollars off of this. It's still a passion project, right? I think you can empathize with that.
For sure.
And what happened is the reason why I'm burying Web Sports Media management is those fucking assholes somehow, with the amount of ads that they were playing, managed to go quote unquote bankrupt and cancel everything. Then they went after us because when they went bankrupt, Ryan somehow came back into the picture full time. Was like, okay, we're going to do this on our own. And I'll give Ryan the props. That is where the seed of main event radio came from, was doing it on our own. So what did I do? Ryan had some equipment that he jerry-rigged from his time at Bell and all that stuff. And he was just simply plugging XLRs into a laptop. you had some pretty shitty sound. So what did I do? I went out of my way. I bought tons of recording equipment. I pretty much created a mobile studio, and I made like a thing. So we did a couple of weeks without Web Sports Media. And I was looking at Ryan the entire time. I'm like, we got to get back on radio at some form. Let's reach out to CJLO. I mean, we left on good terms. At least I know I did. And he looked at me a few times and he went, no, that feels like regression. I go, no, regression is doing this out of your basement, to little, no fanfare or anything. So how Rowdy Wrestling was born was I got us a meeting at CJLO. Ryan and I had agreed on everything. The night before at 2 a.m., he gives me a call and he changes his mind on absolutely everything. And it really felt like everything was yes or no. So everything we chose yes for, he went no. And everything we went no for, he chose yes.
Right.
So I had to talk to him again, and we had to negotiate amongst ourselves, which was weird. And then we finally got to an agreement. No problem. I'm driving to the meeting with Andrew Wheeler, the program director, or at least he was back then, of CJLO. Name drop, because another awesome human being. I love Andrew Wheeler. He calls me in the car. I'm driving to the CJLO studios. And once again, he reneges on everything we'd agreed. So I yell at him, and I'm telling him he's being stupid. Like, this is not the time to change our game plan. Whether you agree with the game plan or not, at least go into the meeting with a unified voice. He goes, okay. And I'm like, perfect. We had agreed on another Sunday morning slot, because for some odd reason, that Sunday morning slot was open again.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a 1 a.m. Thursday night slot that kept enticing him. And I kept telling him, 1 a.m. Thursday is not... And that's when SmackDown was on Fridays.
But you were going to pre-record?
Well, he said, well, it's easier for us to pre-record. I go, no. And then he goes, well, we're going to go in the studio live. And I'm like, I have a day job at that point, And,
all right.
And I didn't have a car. I drove to that meeting because I borrowed a car. I was living downtown. So for me to get to the Loyola campus where the CJLO studio was, that was near impossible at 1 a.m. I'm not taking night buses to get attacked by Madness and Jim Zafiris. Big name drop there. We have to talk about them. They're legends for us.
Well, when I go to do the wrap up point on everything before we started the Rowdy Wrestling podcast, I'll touch on Madness at the same time. So I'll let you finish your story about you leaving the main event. Yeah. We'll touch on the last couple of points that we need to tie a bow on. Basically, I just have. We'll touch on the two name origins, how that came about. Obviously, that relates to Madness.
Look at you resetting the conversation.
Exactly, and just doing our on-air prep. It's because it's almost 2 a.m., right? So,
so all right. So then I'm going back into it. I show up at the meeting, and at that point, I get out of my car, and I wait for Ryan. He shows up, and I'm like, "Listen, Ryan, let's just go in with this. We can at least agree on those three things. Everything else, we don't have to discuss during the meeting." And, immediately Ryan comes in guns blazing, like, we deserve this and we deserve that. And I looked at him, in front of Andrew Wheeler, I'm like, we don't deserve anything. We were here before, but we're gone. So technically we're coming in fresh. Mm. You're not even a student here anymore. I think I was at that time still. So it was coming with me because CJLO, you need a student ratio on your shows. And so, anyways, we end up having a fight in front of Andrew Wheeler. And I could see Andrew kind of going like, "Oh God, this is a shitstorm." Like I could read it in his body language. So I look at Ryan. We walk out the door. I tell him to F off. I'm like, I was done. I was just so mad, and I'm not burying Ryan at this point.
I think you texted me immediately.
I did because I knew you, of all people, you would understand what I had just gone through.
Yeah.
And I'm not burying Ryan because I know he gets in his head.
I was still your off-air mentor along the way, even though I was in my dungeon. We would always discuss everything.
Yeah, we would. You're a go-to guy for these things. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I've ever vocalized it this way. I understand Ryan gets in his head. That's his biggest enemy. Is he becomes inflexible. the biggest thing to do in a partnership is know that compromise isn't a negative word. And actually weighing consequences of doing something your way or the highway is not the best thing ever. Realizing that a pro wrestling show in 2017 on radio is not, at 1 a.m., is not going to draw that many people listening live. So it's going to be a lot of podcasting, and we've proven it that way. So you might as well go Sunday morning before people get out, while they're still getting up, they're still getting ready, and that's your best chance of getting live listeners. That's a wonderful time because people have habits, and old habits can come back really quick, you know? And that was my biggest thing. It was like, if we go again at Sunday, and his entire thing was, oh, I like to go out Saturday night, so getting up Sunday morning's difficult. And the second he said that to me, I lost it. And I'll admit it, that's me, and I have a temper like no one's business. I am an angry human being. You think Guppy gets angry. I'm a regular piece of shit when I'm mad.
You never saw me yelling in the CFMB studios.
So I lost it on him, and that was it. That was the end of it, and I told him F off. And coming back to it is, that's it. I was thinking about doing things on my own. You and I had already had like a really great lunch date or dinner date or whatever it is. It was a date. We almost got to second base. Where we had discussed doing something like that and just going at it ourselves. And that was even slightly before Ryan, you know, taking main events into the basement, sort of, as I called it back then. And then I realized, I'm like, why am I breaking my head trying to work with somebody who doesn't want to play ball? Why am I breaking my head having to fall in line with a schedule, fall in line with do these things, when I stopped watching indie pro wrestling because I got so frustrated because we weren't covering it on main event radio, you know? That was very much a thing. I mean, we were covering WWE and TNA, and that was it. And I would push ROH and get pushback for it. So, you know, I wanted to talk about indie pro wrestling. I still want to talk about WWE, but let me do things my way. And I knew your way, it would be similar to you. So I kept reaching out to you. And you're like, yeah, that interests me. And I'm like, screw it. I'm going to start now, and I'll talk to Steve. I'll eventually get Steve in. And I believe that meeting happened August 4th. I registered the Twitter handles and the emails and all of that of Rowdy Wrestling August 5th. Which is cute because, you know, Brian the Guppy, talking about him earlier, sends us a DM on the Rowdy Wrestling page going, is it your birthday? And I was like, no, it's the anniversary of getting, you know, the Twitter, whatever. And he goes, oh, okay, congrats, whatever. And the first episode dropped August 25th, 2015, with a review of SummerSlam, and this is where we are right now. So we will finally wrap this up with the Rowdy Wrestling part of our whole little show here. But just to say that where the names came from, of course. So I wanted to throw out one correction, much like ESPN and the whole Kornheiser show. What did we screw up? When I threw out feelers to 990, Guppy was already gone. So I was throwing out feelers to the ones who were currently on the air. So it was Dave Simon and his gang. But Rockamaniac, it has nothing to do with The Rock. Okay? So I want to live in a world where it does.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Even though I was a fan of The Rock, I was a bigger fan of Steve Austin at the time. Anyway, so the name Rockamaniac came from Gabriel Morency, one of my radio, influences, obviously. I used to call his show early on in the days when he was at CFMB and I would call Sports Weekly. I would talk about the Colorado Rockies, my favorite baseball team. So he called me a Rockies maniac, Rockamaniac. That's how it came up.
Now, can I ask you?
Yeah.
Because you've told me that before in the past, but I never asked you. Why the Rockies of all the teams?
Larry Walker, because of Montreal Expos.
Okay.
Who got traded to the Colorado Rockies when they were fire sale here in Montreal. They were an expansion team that were only around for a short period of time. I just happened to start following them, and it snowballed from there. Much like I'm a Red Wings fan, because my grandfather, when we would watch the Detroit Red Wings games against the Canadians and Scotty Bowman was the coach, he used to talk about how great of a man Scotty Bowman is, and who used to be, of course, a Montreal Canadiens coach. And I became a fan of the Red Wings. So I'm a Red Wings fan. Because I remember just sitting there on my grandfather's black and white television in the kitchen of his house where he would watch the games while my grandmother watched her shows in the living room, and just seeing Scotty Bowman all the time. So yeah, Rockamaniac came from that. Stabile, of course, I normally would have gone on air as Steve Wilson, but I got Rockamaniac from Morency, so I took that and kept it, because it was what I started with and just had no choice but to continue with it. But
I'm filling out the paperwork to
air,
legally change your name.
Yeah.
You are not be Steve Wilson.
All right. So when I got you on air, I wanted you to have your regular name. You're Stabile, obviously. But of course there is Madness. My time in radio wrestling would not be the same without Madness, the craziest mother effer that ever called a radio show that I've been involved in. I miss him. I haven't spoken to him in a few years now, but he used to call the show and he would fumble his words all the time as I'm trying to plug in my laptop so it doesn't crash here.
That's why you're rushing.
Yes. So yeah, Madness used to call the show, and he would screw up names. So he called you Stabile, right? I'll let you say a little bit while I plug in my laptop.
Well, we do have to give Ryan a slight bit of credit where credit is due. Is Madness was the one that spouted out Stabilo the loudest and clearest, but that played off of the fact that Ryan had messed up my name, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks in a row at random parts in the show, and we called him out on it on one and be like, that's not my last name. And then Madness, I believe, calls in and calls in quite calmly. And then the second he realized he was on air, just belted, Stabilo! And then from there, I guess I lived with it for a couple of years.
Yeah, for anyone who happened to have gone this far in the show, thank you. For those who don't really know us from our time in Quebec radio and don't know about In the Ring or Quebec Indie Wrestling and have actually decided to take the time to listen to the show today, thanks for sitting through the entire story. But at the same time, if you want to know about Madness, go on YouTube. He is famous because he was on some of those U-shoots that was produced by Kayfabe Commentaries. So more specifically, the Sandman one. Go look for that clip. Like Madness shoots on the Sandman U-shoot. Find it on YouTube, folks. You'll love it. That's Madness. That's a legit video of Madness, and it'll give you an idea of what we're talking about.
And that is no character. This is a man who's kicked out of IWS shows many a time for being over-inebriated or mooning wrestlers.
Oh, he puked on himself at an indie wrestling show. He passed out.
He nearly got Amazing Chris.
Yeah, he literally sat there and puked on himself while being passed out and had to be walked out of the building. And then he's sitting outside trying to wake up, and my friend Jeff tries to wake him up, and I think poured a entire can of Pepsi on him trying to wake him up. Yeah, it was fun times.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, fun times.
So there we have it. The names, Rowdy Wrestling. I got you in on the first episode. We
Rowdy
did.
Wrestling. Yeah, you started. I wasn't on the first episode, was I?
No, you weren't. No, like I said, you came in the January after. So about 5 months in, we did the Jake the Snake Roberts documentary review, which I think for me, honestly, that January is when a lot of things started clicking because the show was growing from day one, because luckily enough, there was a decent enough fanfare from Montreal and some of the old main event listeners that did carry over, and I love each and every one of them for doing so. But it was that January, like, yes, okay, WrestleMania time and Royal Rumble, that always helps numbers because we always get that steep climb, then the decline, but it's the difference between December and May of the following years, you see your true growth for any wrestling-related companies, I should say. And, things started clicking, not only because, you were back on the show and I knew I could count on you to carry a lot of the weight when it came down to doing things and being a voice and creating content and being coherent and having an opinion that's backed up with reasons why. not just an opinion presented as fact. So I could focus more on things, and you point out little things left and right of stuff that either I don't know or escapes my mind that helps grow the podcast, be it tags, be it pushing it to other mediums and other of the sort. So when you came on in January, I really felt that was a huge turning point for the show. So about 5 months into it's when you came on.
Yeah, I had heard the first few episodes. You were focusing on Quebec indie wrestling interviews for the most part. You threw in a review here or there. And I mean, you and I had always gotten along either way in terms of our on-air opinions and our on-air discussions and also our vision on it. And I remember hearing it at the time. I think I would send you a message every once in a while because ever since day one when I gave birth to Tony Stabile on the radio industry, he was always in contact with me. And so I would listen to his show every once in a while, and I would send him a note or two. And it just so happened that I happened to get my hands on that Diamond Dallas Page, Jake the Snake Roberts Resurrection, and Jake the Snake Roberts. And of course, because I used to do DVD reviews like crazy for both shows that I used to be on. And so, like, I still had some contacts.
The backlog. Sorry, I have to interrupt you.
Yes,
we have the cheap plug. Go to rowdywrestling.net. There is a Rocco's Reviews.
Oh, gosh. Yeah,
and I have
indexed
and saved every one of the ones that I could find. And so they're all there in a wonderful list.
Yeah. So, so I used to do those all the time. And so I happened to get my hands on that. So Tony was just like, hey, I'd love to see it. Would you like to review it on the show together? I'll like come over to your dungeon and I'll bring my microphones and we'll sit down. We'll do it. I'm like, all right, fine, let's do it. We went and had breakfast that morning. We had a breakfast date, and we just did the show. And I knew when I sat down and did the show that day that it was like, oh, this is what I missed. This is what I missed. I hadn't done it for a while and remembered, the good times, so to speak, and being involved in this. And of course, it's become what it has now become, the huge thing. As we see each and every week, we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we thank you all for joining in here and jumping on the train as we are now envisioning bigger and better things as well for the near future. Actually, and starting in the month of September, we're looking at some new things that we want to launch because we've seen the growth that we have built up on the past year and a half and now 2 years since the beginning of the show. And really, it's been a blast seeing the interaction that we've had, the great milestones that we've been able to hit, and it's because of that. Knowing that you and I have always been, the new team that eventually spun off of what. We trace it all the way back to Aaron Amadeus and Mark the Shark. We're the last of the Mohicans, so to speak. And I know there's other people still on the air, whether it be Ryan. Yes, I know you're on the air. Whether it be the guys on 990, who I'm not going to necessarily bash, even though I can right now. And I'm just not going to pull a shoot because I really, really could. But we're kind of the last of those Mohicans when you draw the line all the way back. And, I'm looking forward to the huge things that we can do on this show. We're looking forward to doing a lot more. And it's been a blast. Thank you. And I've said this to you and personally, Tony, but thank you for getting me back involved, obviously. I have a blast being here on the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast with you. You've come up with something that has been a blast when it comes to producing with you. And, hey, it's been a blast for the first 2 years. So let's look forward to the next few years as well. And so I guess to wrap this up, you have 2 years now and this is really ultimately your baby. I'm just here along for the ride. My babies are done. They're gone. They're grown up and left the nest, so to speak. I don't talk necessarily about them all that much anymore. I brought them up today to recap on the time of the past. So this is your baby. This is your show. So it's your 2-year anniversary show. Your highlights from the past 2 years. Any moments that you specifically want to mention, or a specific moment that you will remember so far the first 2 years of the show, and I'll let you wrap it up because this is your show, buddy.
Well, thank you. I really do appreciate it, but it's your as much yours as it is mine. It might not be your baby. We can look at it as our little love bastard child. What I want to say here is, the 2 years have been so much fun. It's opened the doors for so many things for me. Now I'm heavily involved. I was involved with MWF out of Valleyfield. Now I'm involved with NCW here in St. Ted Ives, just North Shore. It's opened the door for commentating gigs. I do, play-by-play commentary for Torture Chamber pro wrestling events. That's Drew Onyx's school. So, aside for the doors that it's opened for me, I mentioned him just now, Drew Onyx. I got to thank him. He was... What was it? I did an interview with Joey Soprano, a man who I love to death, and I can't wait to see him back in around a pro wrestling ring. He's taking some time off right now, but Drew Onyx heard that interview, and much like Ryan Ryder, sent me a message at 3 a.m. saying, "Hey, I heard the show. I love it. When am I going to be on?" And a name like that in Quebec pro wrestling, taking a chance. I think Joey Soprano was episode 2 or 3. And so it was nothing. Like, there was nothing there. But Drew Onyx saw something in the show, and, a man of his word was opened up and gave me such a fun interview. Guys like Chris Arrows and Sassy Steffi, who came on the show almost immediately. I think they were the first people I reached out to, aside from Pat LaPrade. I had kept in touch with Chris Arrows. He had been on Main Event Radio a few times before me, and a few times with me. And I just reached out to him saying, "Hey man, I'm starting this thing, long form interviews with Quebec pro wrestlers. Do you want to be on it?" He goes, "Yeah, and I'm also dating a hot American wrestler, actually married to, I should say. Have her on too." And I had barely known Steph at that point. I had to do a crap ton of research on her, and little did I know the two of them would go on to be some of my best friends. I love them to bits, which also opened the door for one of my favorite interviews, and it was one of the first ones, so it kind of stings that it's getting so far back. But Frankie the Mobster, the Beast King, Steve, that was hands down. I barely call that an interview because I think I asked maybe about 5 questions in 2 hours. Such a magnificent storyteller and such an honest, genuine human being. I say it all the time. If you've ever wanted to feel safe and in danger simultaneously, give that man a hug. He's so big, he could protect you, but he's so strong, he could just squeeze you to death. Kind of like a toothpaste bottle. Just squeezing the pop, the cap will come off. I love him to bits. Pat LaPrade, my uncle. I mean, he's a guy who...
See, now isn't Patrick Lono your uncle?
No, Patrick Lono is my dad.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Because they're kind of like brothers. That's the reason is when I had hair and was scrawny, Lono and I looked alike.
Oh, yeah.
Now Lono's a dad and aged. I'm not calling him old or saying that he looks old. But
kind of like Guppy?
Yeah, exactly. Guppy still has Guppy-esque looks of when he was younger. I'd say Lono doesn't look too much like he did over 10 years ago, and neither do I. So we don't look alike anymore. But the joke was he looked like me, so I looked like him. I was his son, and because Pat LaPrade was so close to him, they were like brothers. He goes, "I guess that makes you my nephew," and then I never let that go because I'm like, if I can be associated to Pat LaPrade that way in a joking manner, I can't even talk in a joking manner or fashion. I'm happy, and I love the guy to bits. So Pat LaPrade's another one that has been so gracious and comes on pretty much any time. I just shoot him a message. I'm like, "Hey Pat, want to talk about X thing?" And he's like, "Sure, call me at this time and we'll be ready." I'm like, lo and behold, that's where he is. Nico Marshall, gotta love the guy, for calling you out and then you guys having your spat. But Mark Mercer, hands down, my brother on the road, love him to bits. And I got to give another shout out to Pal Marino. I mean, he was on the very first episode. Whenever you're not around to do a review, I essentially give him a call and see if he's able to help out with the show. Honestly, a trooper. If you've ever met a human being who's more loyal than Palmerino, I will fight you to the death. Because that man is honestly one of the most loyal human beings in the world, and I'll always put it over, and I'm always so gracious, and you know, I don't see him nearly as much as I should or want to anymore. But I love the guy, I really do, and you know, all those people, you've really made 2 years be fun, fly by far too quickly, which is depressing in so many other ways, but makes it so fucking fun. Inside
shoot, this was supposed to be done 6 months ago.
Yeah, fuck off. For the 100th episode, I know, but you know, the 100th episode turned out to be that WrestleMania moment episode that I put out just before Mania, so
all right.
I'm not too upset. But that should have been the 100th episode. We didn't do a 1 year anniversary, which is a real shame.
Right.
But we missed the 100th episode, and I think we're gonna hit 150 before the end of the year.
Because I think it was perfectly timed too, because it was like shortly after Rosenberg's show, and it would have been like a perfect touch up because he had touched on the time in the ring. It would have been perfect. But at least we went after Guppy now.
That's true.
I'll give you that.
But that's the thing. That's like the thing I put out there is you and I put ourselves over so much in the show about being organized. If there's one thing, like I always feel weird, it's doing these shows. I almost feel like a dick if I go out of my way to plan it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, oh, look at us, Steve, we're going to put ourselves over. So I guess that's why it falls to the side. And I'm like, oh, well, something else is coming up here. And then I forget about it entirely. And I screw everything up. But you're right. That's all on me. That is 100% on me. And when we realize that because Mania is when a bunch of episodes drop, right? So trying to keep count of what number it is, it goes by really quickly. So once we got to 106, I was like, oops, and then I was like, let's do it at 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, by the way, next year's Mania, if I haven't died from my apparently gimmicked up coke habit and drinking habit that we have here on the show, we're gonna do literally all sorts of crazy Mania coverage next year. Just part of the plans we have for the future.
Well, I'm gonna say it on air, so that way there's a good chance it'll happen. I'm thinking live show
all day. Screw the WWE Network. They don't have anything during the day.
No, not before Mania. What are you talking about? It's barren.
Oh no, dude, we're doing an all-day show.
There you go.
We're doing like WrestleMania X7.
Was it X7 or was it promoted as 2000?
It was 2000, I think.
Yeah, I think it was. X7. No, X7. It's just the video game that was WrestleMania 2000.
Like WWE doesn't have any programming that day. It's ridiculous.
No, nothing at all. Just replays of Total Divas and Swerved.
Yeah, and Swerved. Yeah,
lots of Swerved. Anyways, any final remark you want to make on 2 awesome years and, as you put it, 300 years for you?
Yeah, it's been 300 years. So, I think I've pretty much mentioned everyone I wanted to give a shout out, and if I forgot anybody along the way, my apologies. Gabriel Morency, obviously a big shout out to him, who, really has been a massive involvement. And I already gave shout outs to guys like Paul and his entire family and all the former colleagues that I had at one point or another on the air, as I'm sure at times I was a jerk to deal with on the air. But that's just the way it was. But ultimately, we made great radio. So, in the end of the day, that's what it was about. So, shout out and appreciation to all of those that I've had the pleasure of sharing the mic with over the past 14 years, whether it be directly or indirectly. And of course, once again, it's great to be as part of the Rowdy Wrestling podcast now. I'm not always at those indie wrestling shows, but when I do show up, and then I start tweeting the show, and then they're like, "Oh, which one's Steve?" They see like they don't know what I'm still the guy with the mask on in the image, but nonetheless, it's great to be a part of the Rowdy Wrestling podcast, and looking forward to many more years. And in true fashion, we forgot to mention the guys who help keep the lights on.
heelsandfaces.com. We're doing a plug at the very last second of the show. I'm not going to give their real names because I know that they really like just putting out the brand out there. So I'm going to say they're two of the coolest human beings you could ever do business with, deal with, or just get to know. And go check them out because they support indie pro wrestling. They support Rowdy Wrestling. And they're really just some great guys with some fantastic pro wrestling inspired apparel and merch. They've got pins, they've got stickers, most importantly, they got t-shirts. They have the world's greatest duffel bag, as you'll see, so go check them out, heelsandfaces.com. They just finished up a really great sale, but at all times, if you buy something from them at checkout, use the promo code ROWDY, ROWDY, all in capital letters, to save 10% off your order. That's at heelsandfaces.com. And for Steve Rockamaniac, I'm Tony Stabile. This is the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. 2 years, and let's make it many, many, many more. Thank you to each and every one of you who have downloaded, who share, who like, who subscribe, who support indie pro wrestling in any fashion. Thank you to you, and we'll be back next week with some more Rowdy Wrestling.
Hi, this is Matt Fish, inviting you to check out my brand new show, the Hip Hop Classics Podcast. Each week, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the greatest records the genre has ever produced and talk about why it's so significant to the music as well as the culture. From East Coast to West Coast, G-Funk to hardcore, and everything in between, we're going to cover it all. So join me, won't you? Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube. It's the Hip Hop Classics Podcast, the new music show that you don't want to miss.
Thanks for downloading today's episode. If you're new around here and like what you've heard, hit that like button and slap the subscribe one too. Leave me a comment and tell me what you thought, and I'll see all of you next time.